Imagine being exactly 13 years old. You are sitting in the soft glow of a television screen, watching endless advertisements for processed food that looks absolutely incredible. The commercials tell you that this is what happiness tastes like, so you eat. You start stuffing yourself with potato chips, pastries, and cookies, and the more you consume, the worse you actually feel. People at school start looking at you differently, making cruel jokes about your physical weight. You start asking yourself deeply painful questions. Why are you gaining so much weight? Why are you so ugly? And why do strangers on the street feel perfectly entitled to hurl insults at you just because of how you look? You get angry at yourself for not being able to lose the weight. In the movies, losing weight is a fun little montage set to an upbeat pop song, but reality is a completely different, much darker genre of film. This was the exact daily reality for a woman named Carole, who lives near the Swiss city of Lausanne. Since her teenage years, her diet was a relentless, heavily processed parade of sandwiches, snacks, and sugary drinks. Junk food was not just a meal. It was a biological coping mechanism. The worse she felt about how people looked at her, the more she ate to somehow numb the emotional pain. It was a flawless, self-sustaining loop of absolute misery. Her chemical tolerance kept going up, meaning she constantly needed things that were sweeter, saltier, or more aggressively flavored just to feel a baseline level of comfort. She gradually and completely lost control. But the absolute darkest part of this entire story is that her loss of control was not an accident. It was a carefully engineered corporate business model. Welcome to the unholy trinity of the modern food industry: sugar, salt, and fat. These are no longer just basic ingredients you keep in your kitchen pantry. They are highly weaponized compounds designed to bypass your rational brain and completely hijack your basic survival instincts. Scientists working for multinational food manufacturers spend their entire careers in pristine laboratories, trying to find the absolute perfect mathematical combination of these three tempting ingredients. An investigative journalist named Michael Moss spent years looking deep inside these corporate laboratories and food manufacturing plants. He found that the industry has very specific, incredibly clinical terms for what they are doing to our global food supply. Let us start with salt. They do not just sprinkle salt on things. They engineer what they literally call the flavor burst. Because salt is typically positioned on the surface of a potato chip or a meat snack, it is the very first thing that hits your tongue, sending an immediate signal of pure pleasure straight to your brain. Then comes the fat. The food scientists refer to this specific metric as mouthfeel. It is that warm, comforting sensation of biting into a toasted cheese sandwich, the way the engineered food literally coats the inside of your mouth. And then we have the undisputed king of the trinity, sugar. The food industry has spent billions of dollars calculating a psychological metric they call the bliss point. The bliss point is the exact, scientifically optimized amount of sugar in a consumer product. Not too little, not too much. It is just the precise microscopic measurement required to maximize the allure of the product and guarantee you will keep coming back for more. Michael Moss originally completely resisted calling these consumer products addictive because comparing a standard Oreo cookie to a Schedule 1 narcotic sounds like the wild rantings of a conspiracy theorist, but after years of deep research, he completely changed his mind. He is now thoroughly convinced that in many ways, these highly processed, scientifically optimized food products are actually even more problematic for our society than tobacco, alcohol, or even some illegal drugs. If you want to keep discovering the exact secrets that multi-billion-dollar industries are actively trying to hide from you, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now, because the rabbit hole goes much deeper than just sugar and salt. This specific neurobiology brings us to a woman named Rebecca. For 20 long years, she has suffered in silence from a severe compulsive eating disorder. When her emotions get too intense, when the internal stress feels like a complete disaster inside her, processed food becomes her absolute only refuge. She goes to the grocery store and buys pre-made ravioli with heavy cream sauce, giant packs of grated cheese, Madeleines, and entire boxes of cookies. She does not eat a polite medically recommended portion of this. She eats the entire package of ravioli, covers it in the entire package of cheese, and then forces down the pastries and the cookies until her stomach is in agonizing physical pain. She eats until she physically cannot sit or even lie down. And she does it all in secret, consumed by an unbearable amount of shame. She knows perfectly well that no one is forcing her to eat these massive, excessive quantities. But it is not a matter of basic human willpower anymore. Let us look at what is actually happening inside the brain when these chemicals hit your system. Scientists have run countless experiments on this exact psychological loss of control. If you put a rat in a cage with a pedal that dispenses a dose of sugar, that rat will quickly learn to press the pedal and consume the sugar with frantic desperation. When scientists give rats a literal choice between sugar and pure cocaine, the rats will choose the sugar. The neurological changes in the brain of a human who cannot control their intake of ultra-processed food are practically identical to the brain of someone chronically addicted to cocaine, alcohol, or tobacco. The food industry essentially took a page right out of the big tobacco playbook. Just like tobacco companies added specific texturizers and flavors to optimize the delivery and efficacy of nicotine, food companies use artificial chemistry to optimize the delivery of sugar and fat. The objective in both industries is exactly the same: reduce the perceived risk and massively increase sales. The industry even has a golden mathematical rule for ensuring their massive profit margins. It is called the 80-20 rule. This simple equation dictates that 20% of their customers will consume 80% of their products. Internally, behind closed doors, corporate executives refer to these people as the heavy users. They know exactly who these psychologically vulnerable people are, and they target them ruthlessly through targeted marketing. They want to engineer craveability, or as they actually say in the boardroom, more-ishness. They want to build a chemical product that simply forces your fundamental biology to want more and more. You might assume that at some point, the elite executives running these massive food corporations would look in the mirror and feel a tiny bit of guilt. Well, let us go back in time to April 8th, 1999. A highly secretive meeting took place in Minneapolis. The absolute top CEOs of the 8 biggest food companies in the United States, including giants like Nestle USA, all gathered in one single room. The urgent agenda was the terrifying rise of obesity in the country and the growing medical evidence linking their products to weight gain, diabetes, and even several types of cancer. An executive vice president of Kraft named Michael Mudd bravely stood up in front of his billionaire peers. He gave a detailed presentation arguing that the industry could no longer pretend their food was not part of the problem. He explicitly told the room that doing nothing was the only absolutely unacceptable option. How did the other CEOs react to this desperate moral plea? As you can probably imagine, he was not well received. One executive stood up, visibly angry, and stated absolutely clearly that they were not going to mess around with the company jewels. The jewels, of course, being their highly addictive ingredients of salt, sugar, and fat. They violently refused to alter their recipes if it meant diminishing the attractiveness of their products or hurting their quarterly sales. The meeting ended abruptly. The massive corporations saw absolutely zero financial incentive to change a single thing about their operations, knowing that these elite billionaires sat in a secure room and consciously decided to prioritize their company jewels over public health. I have a serious question for you. Does learning about this deliberate deception change how you look at the colorful packages in your own kitchen? Drop down into the comments and tell me which popular brand you are completely reconsidering right now. Fast forward to the modern era, specifically the year 2021. The Financial Times famously published details from a leaked internal presentation belonging to Nestle, the largest food manufacturer on the planet. In this completely confidential corporate document, Nestle openly acknowledged that the overwhelming majority of its mainstream products were unhealthy. Over 60% of their portfolio did not meet a recognized definition of health. When investigative journalists confronted multinational executives about this damning revelation, the corporate public relations machine went into immediate, aggressive overdrive. They kept repeating a carefully rehearsed script claiming their core philosophy was to help consumers eat well and accompany people on a journey to stay healthy. When asked directly if they thought their heavy users were technically addicted to their products, the executives simply smiled, played completely dumb, and said no. They claimed they developed products to fit a balanced diet, which is a truly fascinating legal defense when your own internal presentations prove the exact mathematical opposite. But while the executives continually dodge these questions wearing expensive suits, the real-world consequences are devastating entire nations. Let us look at the unfolding public health crisis in Mexico. Mexico currently has one of the absolute worst child obesity rates anywhere on Earth. In 1980, just under 7% of the Mexican population was considered obese. Today, that figure has exploded by over 5 times, with over 3/4 of the adult population now classified as overweight or obese. What exactly changed in that specific time frame? In the 1980s and 90s, the country aggressively opened its markets to international trade and economic deregulation. The signing of free trade agreements flooded the Mexican market with cheap, ultra-processed junk food. It was a literal tsunami of weaponized calories. To fully understand the scale of this disaster, you just have to look at the staggering consumption statistics. Today, the average Mexican citizen consumes 163 liters of soda every single year. We meet a hard-working cab driver named Rogelio. He spends up to 12 hours a day sitting inside his car to make a living. His entire daily diet consists of fast, fatty, extremely cheap food washed down with enormous amounts of soda. He currently weighs around 126 kilos. He heavily struggles to breathe and suffocates a lot when he walks even short distances. He tells us that his mother never once told him to eat fruit when he was a child. She just let him eat whatever tasted good. Now, he looks at old pictures of himself with his young son and deeply realizes he is eating himself into an early grave. He desperately wants to lose weight so he can live longer, but the entire commercial environment around him is completely toxic. The Mexican government eventually realized they were facing a total demographic collapse caused by poor nutrition. They bravely decided to fight back against the multinational food giants. They passed 3 essential regulations: a massive sugar tax, a severe clampdown on advertising targeting young children, and a mandatory warning label system. The government legally forced manufacturers to put unmissable black warning labels on the front of any product containing excess sugar, calories, saturated fats, or salt. It was exactly like putting graphic health warnings on a pack of cigarettes. They also legally forced the big companies to remove all cartoon mascots from their packaging. Tony the Tiger and the colorful cereal toucans were formally evicted from the grocery store aisles to protect the youth. The massive food corporations completely panicked. They launched massive, incredibly expensive legal challenges to fight the mandatory black labels. They shamelessly argued in court that putting clear warning labels on food actually confused consumers and prevented them from making healthy choices. Yes, they genuinely tried to argue that hiding the nutritional truth was somehow better for public health. Government health officials noted that these multinational corporations used every delaying tactic and piece of organized misinformation in the book to buy time and keep making profit, knowing perfectly well their products were killing people. Now, contrast Mexico's fierce, desperate fight for survival with a wealthy country like Switzerland. In Switzerland, 42% of the population is overweight, and 1 in 10 is obese. The national healthcare costs related to obesity are completely staggering, costing over 50,000 euros a year per patient in some sectors. Yet, there are absolutely zero legal constraints in place to combat junk food. If you buy a standard bottle of Fanta in Britain, a country which has a strict sugar tax, it contains 4.6 grams of sugar per deciliter. If you buy the exact same bottle of Fanta in Switzerland, it contains 10.3 grams of sugar. That is more than double the amount of sugar for the exact same commercial product, simply because the Swiss government allows it. Swiss politicians from the Geneva region have desperately tried to submit initiatives for a basic sugar tax. They continually point out that companies use 15 different obscure chemical names on their ingredient lists just to hide the total sugar content from regular, everyday people. But the political lobbies in Switzerland are incredibly powerful and incredibly rich. Lobby groups representing Coca-Cola, Red Bull, and domestic sugar producers have very deep, very cozy connections inside the national parliament. When investigative journalists formally reached out to 10 different members of parliament, who are also members of a soft drinks lobby group, not a single one agreed to sit down for an interview. But the corporate interference gets even deeper and far more cynical. Through freedom of information laws, dozens of internal emails were recently uncovered showing that Nestle actively lobbied the Swiss government to oppose Mexico's black warning labels. Nestle reached out directly to the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs. They sent highly confidential memos claiming the Mexican proposal was too radical, completely lacked scientific rationale, and would create unnecessary fear in consumers. They basically asked their home government to act as a diplomatic shield for their global junk food empire. When Mexico's Deputy Minister of Health was shown the Nestle memo, he said his only physical response was to laugh a tragic laugh at the sheer stubbornness and rudeness of the industry. We are at a critical, point of no return breaking point for public health. Pediatricians who have spent decades treating overweight children are loudly sounding the alarm. In the past, a doctor might see a child who was slightly chubby for their age. Today, they are treating children who are massively overweight by 20, 30, or even 40 kilos. These children are not making a conscious, informed choice. They are helpless victims of a perfectly engineered food system. The industry targets them long before the age of 10, aggressively establishing chemical eating habits that will physically trap them for life. We are actively violating the fundamental human rights of children, sacrificing entire generations just to maintain corporate profit margins. Let us return to Carole, the woman who spent her entire life trapped in the vicious cycle of binge eating and crushing public humiliation. She eventually underwent highly dangerous gastric bypass surgery. The doctors had to drastically reduce the physical size of her stomach just to save her life. She has managed to shed 35 kilos, but she has a long road ahead of her. She has to completely relearn how to exist as a human being and relearn basic sensations like feeling hungry or full. She quietly admits that for years she retreated into her own bubble and could not even look strangers in the eye. The relentless mocking and the insults destroyed her humanity to the point where she did not even view herself as a person anymore. She just thought of herself as an ugly thing. When asked what she would have done if she did not have children, her honest answer is totally devastating. She says she would have let herself go completely and she would have been dead years ago. She did not love herself enough to find an escape from the food trap. She only fought to survive because she deeply loves her children and wants them to have a normal mother. And that, right there, is the ultimate true cost of the food industry's flawless business model. We are up against a massive machine, and spreading the absolute truth is our best possible weapon. If this video made you think differently about what is on your plate, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your final thoughts in the comments below. Stay sharp, and I will see you in the next one.